Χαίρετε and salvete, omnes. Welcome to another video. I'm sorry it's been so long since I've posted anything. I am preparing for my comprehensive examination, and so I've been a little preoccupied with trying to keep up with all my readings. So what I'm going to try to do is actually do a bunch of videos this week and balance it from there, because I was actually waiting for supplies to come in for some of the projects I had planned. So for this video, what we're actually going to be talking about is graduate programs that are online. So I have done 2 master's degrees. Well, I've done 1 master's degree and I'm almost done my second. The first master's degree was through the University of Oklahoma, and it was for a museum studies master's degree. In the United States, museum studies master's is the terminal degree. The only way I would be able to get a PhD in that field would be through a museum studies program overseas. So in the US, because it's a terminal degree, that's part of the reason I wanted to pursue it. And it was also because I was already working in museums when I applied, and because I plan on being a curator eventually. So I thought that was the smartest move for me to begin with, because I was specifically working in museums already, and I was hoping that maybe I would get funding through the museum that I was working in, but that didn't work out. And so I'm going to be talking about the museum studies master's format versus the format I have at Villanova, and the biggest differences between the two, because I'm at Villanova for classical studies and the programs are very different. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the difference in the universities themselves. So University of Oklahoma is a public research nonprofit university, whereas Villanova is a private Catholic nonprofit university. They're both research universities, but Oklahoma was public and Villanova is private, and Villanova has a religious affiliation, but you do not have to be Catholic to go there. So the biggest difference was in my admissions requirements for both of the fields that I was going into. University of Oklahoma has changed their application requirements, so this is no longer valid because I entered in the program in 2016, so they've changed it a lot. But from what I remember, all I had to do was the online application, letters of recommendation, a personal statement, and my transcripts. I don't remember ever having to send them a writing sample. I think I may have sent them the one I did in undergrad for the 4th century Apulian Pelike that I analyzed for an independent study. For Villanova, the only reason you submit a writing sample is if you want to be considered for the tuition scholarship. So because that was a big deal for me, knowing that I could possibly get funding, I decided, okay, I'm going to put in my application with my writing sample. And the writing sample I sent was an interdisciplinary paper that analyzed Percy Jackson and how ADHD and dyslexia were represented in the novels compared to how we handle disabilities in the military in America, because it was set in America, the books, and also how disabilities are accommodated within communities, including in modern Greece, where as of the time I wrote that paper in 2016, the only thing they accommodate for a learning disability in modern Greece from my research was dyslexia. I also went into the linguistics of having dyslexia in one language and not in the other for bilingual or multilingual people, which was a really fascinating thing, and I'd like to expand on that paper and get it published someday. But I knew that the director of the program had also done work on Percy Jackson in her work. So I thought that was the perfect paper for me to actually use as my application for Villanova. And part of the reason I used it, aside from that, is I actually wrote it in my museum studies program because we had introductory classes like Intro to Grad Studies and Intro to Interdisciplinary Studies. So I had 2 papers to choose from that had nothing to do with museums that would have been relevant to the program I was going into, which was classical studies, so I picked Percy Jackson because it was the most relevant. The other paper is about contemporary paganism and how it spread because of the internet. And that is a completely separate project that I would like to revisit at some point. So for Villanova, the application required a statement of goals, which is a little different than a personal statement. The CV, I'm sorry, I forgot to say that for the Oklahoma application, I also had to put in a CV. I think that's pretty standard with most graduate applications. And then my letters of recommendation, and both of them required my transcripts, of course. So I believe both of my applications, both for Villanova and for the University of Oklahoma, both of them were $50. So it wasn't that bad because I was working at the time that I applied to my University of Oklahoma. I just saved up. I was working part-time for that, but I was working full-time by the time I started to apply for Villanova. So for the funding that I ended up getting at the University of Oklahoma, there was no funding package. I had to do all loans because a lot of times for a master's degree program, you don't get a funding package, especially for a distance program. So always look into that if you are interested in doing a master's program and you can't necessarily fund it yourself. Then it's either loans or finding enough scholarships. I actually ended up getting a scholarship through Mensa, but it was only $600, and it helped me buy my books that semester and then some of my supplies, because museum studies books are really expensive. I have one book, I believe, that was $85 out of $5 for one class. So that's one of the biggest costs that I had at the University of Oklahoma, which is completely different from Villanova, which I'll get to in a second. So I did all loans except for that $600, and then anything that was supplies or my own computer or anything like that, once I started working full time, I was able to afford by myself. So I ended up paying for supplies on my own. Whereas for Villanova, I ended up getting the tuition scholarship. I didn't get it the first round. What I ended up doing is getting it on the second round, didn't see the email, panicked once I saw the email because it was a couple days after the cutoff, so I frantically emailed back, didn't hear back, and then I was really panicked, so I left voicemails almost every single day and then emailed again for a couple days, hoping to God I got the scholarship. And then I got an email a couple days later from that first day of panic, after I think 2 emails and 3 panicked voice calls saying, I would really appreciate it if this is still available, although I understand if it isn't and you've moved on to the next candidate. I did end up getting the scholarship, so I was so excited and relieved because I had enough allocated for my grad loans for me to get through one year of Villanova before I would have completely capped out on my graduate loans, which would have been awful. So luckily I got the tuition scholarship, so everything else from Villanova I've had to pay out of pocket, but again, I'm working full time, so I have the advantage of having enough money to be able to buy my supplies. Luckily, Villanova also, because it's classical studies, gives us a lot of online resources. We use the online Loeb, we use the online Perseus, we use Theoi, we use ancient literature. So all of those websites we are given as the option for our readings, either in the original language or in English. Because I chose to be a classical civilization concentration, my classes are all in translation. So I can sit in on the ancient Greek and Latin classes and the translation sections, but part of the reason I ended up not doing that is because I work full time, like I said, and the class time is only an hour for classical civilization concentration majors. But if I had ancient Greek and Latin translation sections, I would have a 2-hour course, and unfortunately, recently my classes have been on days where I work, because I usually don't work Monday, Tuesday, and because my first couple classes in the semester were Mondays and Tuesdays, I didn't have to worry about them overlapping with my work day. However, this past semester and this semester now, I have actually had to take classes either immediately after my shift was over at 5 p.m. So I would be literally closing the museum while I had my phone in my hand, walking around while I'm listening to everyone talk, trying to make sure doors are locked, and listening to, my classmates talk about Plato. Or I would have to take my lunch at 3 p.m. my time because it's a 6 p.m. class. So unfortunately, when it falls on days like that, I wouldn't have been able to do a 2-hour course. So I've been keeping up with languages through self-study and on my own, and I'm considering doing an intensive summer program at some point so I can make sure I don't fall too far behind. So I got funding through Villanova. I also ended up getting another scholarship for $900 through the ESA. So I did get a scholarship in the fall for that. So that helped a lot. That actually was what helped me get my new laptop. That I had been working on a Chromebook, specifically just a Chromebook, since 2016 for my other program, and that wasn't enough for what I needed it to do for my classical studies. Luckily, on my breaks and stuff, I could work on my work computer through the online Outlook through Villanova, so it would be saved there in the cloud and I would be able to access it later. But because I was working just solely off a Chromebook, getting that getting that laptop helped me exponentially, because I could put actual documents on there without it going after there was too many files on there. Because Chromebooks are great and they're light and they're easy to take to class or take to the library, but they don't have much power and they don't keep as many documents as I would need for my classical studies on there. So I actually managed almost the whole degree without a new laptop, but because I got the scholarship, I was able to afford a new one. So I got a regular laptop, and that's been so helpful for several reasons. So that was great. The next difference I want to talk about is the format of the schools. So the University of Oklahoma was very self-guided, self-led, and asynchronous. We didn't have lectures we had to attend. However, we had an excessive amount of reading. Like, the amount of time you would have been in class, that was replaced by readings. Then you would have a bunch of things to do as an assignment to make up for the fact that you didn't have a lecture. So you would have almost always discussion posts, you would have short essays, and then you would have a final paper or final project, depending on the class. So a lot of times it would be things like have a discussion post, reply to at least 2 people, reply to the people who replied to your post. So you should have had a total of 4 replies and your initial post with X amount of how much they wanted you to write in terms of words. And then you would have either a short paper or a midterm paper, and then we would do a project or a final essay. A lot of times it was a project of some sort or an explorative essay, because museum studies is very much a hands-on field. So they wanted us to get experience doing things like creating your own museum. I had a museum management course where we basically sat down and our project was to create a museum, and we would have presentations that we would record, and then our classmates would watch them later and then comment on them as part of their grade. So you would not be presenting live. So you would sit in front of your computer, kind of like I'm doing right now, and you would say, okay, here's my PowerPoint about the museum I've designed, or here's a PowerPoint about a historic landmark in my hometown. So we did things like that for my museum studies classes. It wasn't too bad. I actually really liked doing the asynchronous self-guided study a lot, because that meant I could read when I had time. I didn't have to worry about a class time interfering with my lunch hour or for my work schedule. So that helped. Also, because I work in a museum, reading those books wouldn't look super weird while I'm sitting at the front desk waiting to greet guests or whatever. They just figure I'm reading because I'm a museum employee, which, I mean, that's why I read anyways, because I need to know this stuff. So it was really helpful that I was able to do that while I'm sitting and in between the work I actually do. And once I've done my work, then exploring those things is good. As I already kind of touched on before I got to this, is Villanova has synchronous class times. So it depends on where you live, but you're gonna have to figure out, okay, the class is at 3 p.m. for me because it's 6 p.m. over in Pennsylvania. So that's my biggest issue, was the fact that I had to kind of figure out what I could do if the class fell on a day that I was already at work. So luckily, I've had not that many problems with that. I actually changed my schedule. It was really weird for one semester, where my days off were Monday and Thursday because I had a 2-hour class on Thursday. And luckily, my supervisor was nice enough to let me switch my schedule just for that semester. And so I worked Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then Monday and Thursday were my classes. So I had off those days, so I didn't have to worry about it. However, this semester, my classes are on Wednesday and Thursday. Part of the problem with that is Monday I have to have off because that's when the museum is closed. So I didn't want to change my Monday, Tuesday days off. So what I ended up doing instead is, luckily, I made my lunch at 3 p.m., which I had to do last semester too for one of my classes, on Wednesday. So what I end up doing is I take a 15-minute break at 1 o'clock, I eat something really, really fast, and then at 3 o'clock I take my full hour lunch, and that's when I go to class. I do it on my phone while I'm in my office, and if I'm still hungry, I'm eating again. And then on Thursdays now, my class is at 5. So my work schedule is kind of weird. My schedule is technically 8:30 to 5:30, but because of this schedule change, I technically am Thursday 8 to 5. So as soon as it turns 8 o'clock on Thursdays, I start my work. And then as soon as the work day is over and I hear the doors lock, I am in class immediately. So that has been a challenge for sure because I work full time, but luckily I have a supervisor who is very flexible, and I'm able to kind of finagle things on the days I need to, and because this is my last semester, we won't have to worry about it after this. But I do really like the synchronous for the point of having the live discussions with the other students, and it makes me feel like I'm getting to know my classmates better than doing just the discussion posts online through Canvas, which is how I did it through the University of Oklahoma. But it just seemed like all of my classmates were whatever their icon was, so a face or a bird or whatever they made their icon. And so having the synchronous classes, while frustrating in the way of being so far behind their time zone, is that I can ask questions to the professor as I think of them without going, oh, I gotta email them now and I have to think of it really quick. I can put it in the chat box while we're in our meeting, and the professor usually can answer me right away or tell me they'll email me after the class about it. So that's really, really nice. And that's why there's pros and cons to both. I would prefer synchronous classes if they fell on days where I didn't have work, or if I was able to take the second half of the day off, basically, for the semester. But it's difficult to do that, and I made it work, and that's what's important. Asynchronous self-guided is good, but I think part of the reason I liked it for my museum studies versus my classical studies is museum studies I felt like I already knew a lot of. I already was very familiar with a lot of the material, so reading it was just kind of solidifying what I already knew, or teaching me newer ways to do something that I hadn't known because I was an intern 2 years ago for this type of thing, and now they've changed the, way that it's done. So that's part of why I was okay with the self-guided for the museum studies. I don't know if I would have succeeded in the same way in classical studies if it had been asynchronous and self-guided. So like I mentioned, University of Oklahoma used Canvas. So for the learning management systems at the University of Oklahoma, we actually started with D2L, or Desire to Learn, and I finally got used to it because it was one of the ones I had never used before. I'd used Sakai, I'd used Canvas, I've used Blackboard, but I had no idea what D2L was till I went to the University of Oklahoma. And for that, I ended up learning it really well, and then after our first semester, they said, oh, we're switching everything over to Canvas. So I was like, no, because I had finally gotten used to D2L. So we switched over to Canvas, and once we did that, I got used to it, and I actually really liked the interface. And I really prefer Canvas over all of the other learning management systems. There are some things I wish I could tweak for it, which is mostly I wish that the side of the professors reflected the same way as the way the students see it, because some of the professors wrote stuff and then it was hard for us to find it, and that's a tough subject for me, because there was one class in the University of Oklahoma where I got a B because I had to click through 7 different things to find the review from the professor and with the suggestions on what to fix, and I never saw it until almost the end of the semester, and so I ended up getting a B, and that was really frustrating to me because I'd gotten A's and everything else. And it wasn't even for a museum studies course, it was for a research course, which was one of the gen eds that they had us take in addition to intro to grad studies and interdisciplinary foundations. So for that, it was like, okay, I guess. But I do prefer Canvas over everything I've used so far. I don't like Blackboard at all. Sakai I don't think exists anymore, so I don't have to worry about that, but that was what I had to use in my undergrad. I'm not sure if it exists anymore or if it's just changed or gotten a refurbished type look or name, but that's what we used in undergrad, was Sakai. So for Villanova, we actually use OneNote, which is a Microsoft program. So technically, Villanova University uses Blackboard, but the director of classical studies at Villanova doesn't like it. So she has us use OneNote in Teams primarily. So in OneNote, that's where you get all of your syllabi, that's where you put all of your information when you do blog posts, discussion posts, and whatnot. Some professors put discussion posts in OneNote. Some professors put discussions in Teams. I prefer the discussion in Teams because it tells you who posted it, and then you can write them individually underneath that person's thing. Not all the professors do that, so when you have to do that in a OneNote area, it makes it really jumbled and kind of hard to follow who's talking to who. So I don't really like it when we do it that way, but it's better than other things. I would say it's better than Blackboard, but I would still prefer if we had used Canvas, mostly because I'm used to it, and two, because I think that Canvas is just the best interface you can use for that kind of stuff when you want something like discussion posts, submissions of assignments, tests, quizzes, all that jazz on one thing. So I think that makes the most sense, but I haven't had that many issues with OneNote. It's just, it's finicky sometimes for me because of my internet connection, and sometimes because I have a slow computer, and that's not really OneNote's fault, it's more my fault. But aside from that, I prefer Canvas, but I can work with OneNote. If I had to use Blackboard, I'd probably be screaming by now. So at least it's not Blackboard, is the punchline here. So the grading system in both of these programs were different. In Oklahoma, you didn't have any pluses or minuses. It was A, B, C, D, F. That's it. You couldn't get a C in, I think, more than 2 classes. Again, this may have changed since I've been there. I got all A's except for that one B. So it was super frustrating to me because there was no pluses or minuses. So I couldn't even get like a B plus out of it. It was just B. So I ended up with a 3.89 at the end of my program, which is super frustrating to me. And then Villanova actually has plus and minuses. So there's A minus, B plus, B minus, etc. So that's how their grading system works. So far with Villanova, I have almost all A's except for an A minus and a B plus. B plus is very frustrating to me, but I know I'm not supposed to let grades define me, but it's very frustrating anyway because I worked so hard. But I'm trying to reconstitute that as a win because I did study a lot in that class. So the completion requirements for both schools are different. The completion requirement I had for the University of Oklahoma for museum studies was comprehensive examinations. However, we had an extended period of time to work on them. I can't remember if it was 1 week or 2 weeks because I remember panicking severely and staying up for 23 hours because I needed to finish the last essay. But it was 4 essays, which was essentially like a 12-page paper, I think. 12 or 15, around there. And it had prompts for what you would have to say. And so you couldn't reuse an essay you had already written for a class. And one of the things that I got for one of my sections was a paper I had just written. So I was so frustrated, and I ended up citing myself a lot in that essay to kind of circumvent the rule that I couldn't reuse the essay. I just used the quotes that I knew I wouldn't be able to rewrite in my own words again. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just cite myself from this essay to get this. So it was 4 prompts. You had a week or 2 weeks to do it, and then you turned it in, and then you would hear back whether or not you passed. And I got, I think, 0.5 points over the passing mark. And I was like, you know what? I don't care. I'm done. Cool. I passed my comp. So the completion requirements for Villanova is different because it's for classical studies. So we have a portfolio, which includes 2 essays from our history of Latin literature class and our history of Greek literature class. And then the 3rd essay is from one of the other seminars that we took that has exemplary writing from a graduate level. So for the comprehensive exams through Villanova, if you are any of the language concentrations, you could do Latin, Greek, and Latin, or classical civ. So if you were any of the languages, you had a reading list, and then you have a translation exam. Then for classical civ, you have the same reading list, but all of things in translation. You get some type of civilization test. We don't really know the format as of yet, from what I can remember and saw. And then Villanova also offers an optional modern language exam. You can take French, German, or Italian. I asked, and you can take all three if you want. I ended up not taking any of them because I actually missed the deadline, and I kind of panicked when I thought, oh, I want to do the French exam, and then I was like, I don't know if I'm going to pass it, and then if I don't pass it, I'll feel horrible, and then I'll have to take it again, and then what if I don't graduate? And then I spiraled real hard, and then I missed the deadline. So, because it was optional, at least, I'm not going to get any kind of mark against me for it, but I gotta really work on that anxiety for doing that. So I'm preparing for my comps now, so I'm working my way through the reading list, and if you haven't seen my post on Twitter, or if you haven't seen me post it anywhere else, my coworker, who is a librarian, actually made me a list of my comp readings, and she gives me stickers every time I finish one, and it's on that door right there, so she can put a sticker on there every time I finish a reading, so it's a good motivator. So those are the completion requirements for Villanova. There's no thesis or project, which is kind of what the portfolio is supposed to take place of. So I'm going to talk about the other programs I applied to while I applied to these programs. For museum studies, I did consider applying to Johns Hopkins as well as the University of Oklahoma. The only reason I didn't was because at the time I was living with 3 other people. I was working only part-time at $10 an hour. My fiance was fully supporting me financially at the time. And the completion requirement for Johns Hopkins is a 2-week seminar intensive, either in Baltimore, DC, or abroad, from the requirements from when I was applying. So I didn't think I would be able to actually finance that if I was already using my student loans to pay for Johns Hopkins, which is a private and expensive school. I really wanted to go to Johns Hopkins, but I knew that that wasn't as realistic, so I didn't end up applying because University of Oklahoma, in comparison, was completely online. Everything was done either locally or through our online program. So everything was either Canvas or in Las Vegas, so I didn't have to go anywhere aside from driving in town, and I had a car, so that was a plus for me for the University of Oklahoma. So I didn't even bother applying to Johns Hopkins because I knew if I got in, I would go there instead, possibly get to the end of the program and then not be able to afford to go, and I didn't want that to happen, so I ended up just not bothering. Whereas for Villanova, I actually applied to the University of Georgia postbac in classical languages as kind of like a backup or an interim thing before I went full term at a school for a master's, because it would have taken me about the same amount of time. However, the postbac presented the same problem as Villanova would have, which was funding. I wouldn't have been able to fund the postbac certificate in the same way. So I applied thinking, this is my backup and I'll figure it out if I get in and don't get into Villanova. But I lucked out. I got into Villanova and I got funding, so I didn't have to worry about it. So I pulled my application from the University of Georgia once I found out I was accepted into Villanova, because I figured, well, I'm going to get the master's degree, so I don't need the post-bac right now. I might do the post-bac anyway, depending on what level my assessment for my ancient languages are, so we'll see. Additionally, I actually ended up finding out recently that the University of Edinburgh has an online program that's new in ancient studies, which would have been a good option for me, because I believe that university also takes American FAFSA loans. So if I had waited, I might have gone to that program instead, because their variety of classes were more up my alley in terms of the variety I was seeking. However, the classes that I did take at Villanova were very good, and I was interested in them, and a lot of things actually got me to think of new things that I'm interested in and discover kind of new fields and topics in classics that I hadn't really explored before on my own. So the next thing I want to talk about is the imposter syndrome in Oklahoma versus Villanova. I didn't feel like an imposter at all at the University of Oklahoma. I think partially because I had such a variety of classmates. I had worked in museums of all sorts since I was like 17. I got in on conditional admission when I applied to the University of Oklahoma, so that meant my first 12 credits had to be good grades or I would be booted from the program. So once I got my first 12 credits, which were all A's and 1B, and then another 2 A's from the next semester, I wasn't really too worried about whether or not I belonged here, because I proved that I did. Whereas Villanova, I got in and then I got the tuition scholarship. Sure, I got it on the second round, but I must have still been good enough to get a tuition scholarship. And part of the reason I felt such imposter syndrome, and why I still feel it now, is mostly because when I go into certain classes, I feel like I don't remember or don't know a lot of the things that my classmates are talking about, even though we've done the same readings and we've done the same work and everything like that. I still feel like there's not enough that I know. Whereas for museum studies, I did a lot of practical work. I worked full-time in a museum. I think my imposter syndrome might be alleviated a little bit if I continue to work in classics in a different way. Right now with my YouTube channel, that's the most engagement I can have pretty much in Las Vegas. But once I get to a point, or I get into a PhD program perhaps, and I can work in museums with ancient collections, I feel like my imposter syndrome will alleviate a little bit. But right now, it feels like, wow, I have no idea what this guy in my class is talking about. And I know that, you know what, he might not know what he's talking about either, but it's one of those things where I feel like the things I'm saying don't sound as intelligent as the things that my classmates are saying, and I need to be better about that, because we all have different expertise. So obviously I'm gonna be there to learn, so I'm gonna try to be better about feeling like, oh, I don't know this. Of course I don't know it. Half the stuff I'm learning in my master's degree program is stuff I've never learned before, or was just blown over in my like survey class of ancient Rome. Of course I'm not going to remember specifics about Augustan Rome. So that's a lot of what is going on with my brain for imposter syndrome right now, but I'm almost done my master's program. I need to chill out with that. So that's why I didn't have imposter syndrome as much with my museum studies program, because I felt like I belonged there and I knew that I knew what I was doing, whereas I still kind of don't feel like I know what I'm doing with classics. but I'm getting there, and that's what matters. One of the best things about both of these programs is neither one of them required the GRE. So I actually haven't taken it yet, and I will be taking it this summer. So once I'm done studying for my comps, I'm going to be studying for the GRE. So that's going to be super fun. So for this next section, I'm basically going to be reading because I have a lot to talk about in this next section, and I don't want to take too long or be too rambly. So I'm going to use this to guide me. So neither of my programs really offer too much in the ways of variety. One of the reasons I considered Johns Hopkins so much before I decided ultimately not to apply is because of the variety of classes they had, especially because they taught things like disabilities and accessibility in museum settings. That's very important to me to know and learn about that stuff. We didn't have anything like that at the University of Oklahoma. There was very slim pickings, but there was enough that I basically made a path that was a curator path. I did museum management, I did collections management, I did Native Americans in museums, I did historic preservation, things like that. So I basically made it so it was tailored to a curatorial path, but could be related to anything. Villanova only offers enough classes for you to take full time, and it's 1 or 2 classes per section of the civilization, the Latin, and the Greek. So it depends on what you're interested in and whether or not you have to be there full time. If I wasn't a tuition scholar and didn't have to be there full time, I might have skipped some of the classes I took, but at the same time, I really liked them eventually. I think that part of the good thing of me kind of having to take these classes is that I'm discovering new things that I like about this particular area of classics, and it's very focused on Rome. Villanova is very focused on Rome. You only take 2 Greek classes. I took history of Greek literature, and I'm taking Plato now. So it's not intensely about Greek anything. Our history, our civ classes can focus on Greek subject matters, but when I took ancient historiography, it was both Greek and Roman, which was a lot of reading because we were going through a lot of authors because that's a lot of stuff to go through for ancient historiography. And so I kind of had like 2.5 Greek classes, but everything else was pretty much focused on Rome. So now we're going to get to the downsides of online programs. The biggest downside for me is not being able to use the facilities that would be available to you as an in-person student, specifically the library. Villanova has a graduate library section for grad students to go to, and I can't use it because I'm here. And part of my issue is because I'm not a student at the local university, is I can get into the university before a certain time, but after a certain time, students who are visitors aren't technically allowed to be there. Even if you're like in the middle of reading, you kind of have to leave. If you don't notice the time and you end up leaving later, you can't re-enter without an ID. So that's really frustrating to me, especially I'm the kind of person who literally needs to be in a library until it closes. Like, I will be there until midnight reading so I can get things done. Can't do that here. And I can't use the facilities in Villanova because I'm in Las Vegas and they are in Pennsylvania. And then forming friendships is kind of hard when you're an online program, especially because you kind of only talk through online chats and things like that. One of the reasons I do like this synchronous classes is because it feels more personable. It feels like you're getting to know your classmates more, but you're not going to form friendships in the same way as you would in an in-person program like you did in your undergrad. And that's kind of frustrating to me because, you know, I can't walk around campus and have someone tap me on the shoulder and be like, I like your shirt. Did you go to Anime Boston? Like, which is how I made a friend as an undergrad. I had an Anime Boston t-shirt on from when I went to a convention there, and I went there and she was from Boston, and that's how we became friends. I don't really have that experience anymore, and that's kind of upsetting to me because it's hard to make friends as an adult. Almost all of my friends are online now. It's ridiculous. The next thing is it's kind of hard to get to know your professors in the same way it's hard to get to know friends. So professors will be harder to get in contact with or harder to schedule like online office hours when you work full time and you're in different time zones. So there are some professors that are easier to talk to, or professors that you've had multiple classes with, and it's easier to start talking to them through email and be like, hi, we've had 3 classes together now, and I was wondering if you could take a look at my CV and help me apply to this school for this program. So, it depends. I've only had a couple professors like that. All the other professors have been kind of harder for me to connect with. So I can't just go and show up in their office hours and be like, hey, do you want a coffee? I brought you one, because that's just, some people do that for their professors. I brought my professors like baklava and stuff when I was an undergrad just because that's what I would bring for Christmas. And I'd be like, hey, I was in the building. Do you want a slice of baklava? Stuff like that. You can't really do that when you're an online student, because the coffee and the baklava would not be fresh or hot when you got there. So that's a downside, because it feels less personable, and you need to get to know your professors, especially in grad school, especially if you want to continue past the master's and into PhD programs. Those are the people who are going to write your recommendations, and they don't need to know just your academic self, but like everything about you, like you as a person. A lot of my professors know me as a person because I kind of have no filter when I talk in class, so I end up saying strange things, and they know me as a person, they know my personality, but not everyone's like that. So it's kind of hard to get the professor to get to know you when you're an online student. The biggest downside, in my opinion, is missing out on events. There were so many events, especially at Villanova, that had to do with classics that I missed because I live so far away. It's not like they were in California or anything where I could just be like, okay, I'll take a day off and drive 5 hours to LA. I can't do that. So it's frustrating because as an online student, you're like, that sounds like a really cool thing, but I can't go. If you were on campus, you'd be like, well, that's a day I have class until 5, but I could pop by at 5:30 and see what's going on if my class gets out early, or I'll pop in towards the end and see if, I can still talk to the speaker or whatever. I can't do that. So that is really frustrating, and like seeing speaker series, seeing presentations, local presentations of other students that, supporting your cohort and things like that. You can't do it as an online student. And it's just frustrating because I would like to support my cohort. I want to see the people who go and present their posters or their papers for the grad competitions that are on campus, but I was never able to do anything like that. So that's the biggest downside, in my opinion, is not being able to go to the on-campus or nearby campus events that would really kind of enrich your experience. We don't have anything for classics in Las Vegas. Nothing. We don't have anything. There is a minor in classics at the local university, but I have heard so many people complain that it's difficult to claim and get the classes for. So when you don't have access to it, it's frustrating to see all of these things that you could be doing if you lived in that area, but you don't. So the upsides to all these things, however, I am able to hold down a full-time job while going to grad school full-time. That is very difficult. It has been very difficult, but I could do it. And that has helped me do things like afford my bills while also still going to school and finishing my master's. Being able to attend school while going to work full time was really important to me because I'm still gaining experience while getting my education. So it not only shows that education was important to me, but I can multitask with an extensive course load on top of a workload. The next big upside is I didn't have to move for a 2-year program. So I am more than happy to move for a PhD program because I know it'll be like 5 to 7 years of my life. However, moving for a 2-year program would have been extremely difficult, especially because after the 2 years, if I couldn't find anything in the area for a job, I would have had to move again. And if I had to move for my master's in classics, I would have moved twice in 4 years, and I already did that when I moved to Las Vegas, and let me tell you, moving in town was a pain in the butt. Moving out of state twice within 4 years, no thank you. I don't like moving. Who does? I like traveling, but I do not like moving. So because I didn't have to move, that was a big plus for me. Doing it online was great because I didn't have to move. I've been a permanent Las Vegas resident since 2015, and I don't have to do anything until I get into a PhD program. So that's what I wanted. I didn't want to go have to move all the way across the country, halfway across the country twice for 2 different degree programs. So that's the upside in my opinion, especially if you already have a job like I do. Then you have to go and find another job or a part-time job or whatever. The only reason I would have moved fully is if I had gotten a fully funded program that paid both the tuition and living expenses. I didn't have that for either. So Villanova pays my tuition, but they don't pay anything else. It's just the tuition and fees. So there's no like living stipend that goes with it. It's just the tuition. So I didn't have to deal with moving, finding an apartment, finding out if the apartment takes cats because I have a cat, and then, you know, worrying about living in an apartment that's really small or anything like that. So luckily that was not an issue. So the other thing is a lot of schools that have online programs will also have different services for online students. Villanova specifically has a service through the library for distance students where you can request a bunch of books and they will mail it to you for free, give you a packing slip so you can mail it back to them, and you don't have to pay for it at all. They send it to you. So if you see books in the library that you wouldn't have access to otherwise, you can request it from Villanova. So that is a great service. So there are services like that where you can access things from the campus without having to physically be there. And then both programs have made it easier for me to do hands-on things. It was required for my museum studies program for us to do something called the museum project and then an internship, which was optional. So I did the museum project actually at a connected museum of where I work now, and I did it as a curatorial support project and worked with him for a semester, and then got hired here the semester after that, and then I ended up doing an internship in the research library at my work, and so I was able to do the internship while I was getting paid to work. So I was doing the internship, getting paid to be here, and I still got hands-on experience through the library at my job while getting paid, and got hands-on experience with research libraries, which was not part of my training. And research libraries and museums is an important thing for me to know, so that's why I wanted to do it. And it wasn't originally part of my job description, so I was able to do it as part of an internship. Villanova offers research funding for summer projects for their grad students. I didn't do it last semester, and because I'm graduating in May, I can't do it now. But you have an option to do that kind of work over the summer if you do a summer project, and then you report back on it. The other thing that I ended up doing through Villanova, I got invited to speak at a conference. And so I'm going to be on a panel in the end of March. At the end of March, I will be on a panel and I will be talking about this, my YouTube channel. And so for that, I actually got support from Villanova. I got reimbursement funding guaranteed as long as I turn in all my receipts at the end of the whole hullabaloo. So the due date for all of that is the day after the conference ends. So hopefully I have it all ready and set up and everything. And then that's the difference between my two schools. They're both good schools. I enjoyed going to both immensely. But I wanted to give my opinions and information on how it was with my experience. Not everyone is going to have the same experience. I know some people had issues with certain professors at different schools because of I have no idea why. I didn't have any problems with a professor that someone else had like tons of problems with, and they failed a class. It was really bad, and it's not a universal experience, but I wanted to let you know mine and how different fields and different setups through different schools, public versus private, synchronous versus asynchronous, funded versus loans. So I hope this helped you kind of get an idea of how different online programs can be. And if you have any other questions for me specifically about my programs or generally about graduate school, please leave a comment below, and I will see you all in the next video where I will be crafting again.